Welcome back. You're watching Australian Agenda, where Paul Kelly and I are speaking to the Shadow Treasurer, Joe Hockey. Mr Hockey, you're often described as one of the, if not the leading moderate in the federal parliamentary Liberal Party. What's one issue that, as a leading moderate, you'd be prepared to stand up to the leading Conservative, Tony Abbott, on if you win government?
What sort of question's that?
Well, I'm wondering how alive and well moderate tendencies within the Liberal Party are.
Well, look, I agree with Tony Abbott on a whole host of things, including the determination to get rid of a bad government. I don't think the Australian people really care for, philosophical debate about conservative values versus modern liberalism. But frankly, Tony and I might disagree on the Republic. In fact, we do. But
you won't be standing up for it.
The issues that unite us are far, far stronger than those divide us. And I'll tell you what, one thing, the relationship between Tony as leader and myself as the Treasury spokesman in opposition and in government will be very close.
On the age,
very close.
On the age of entitlement speech that you gave when you were in London, there was a range of things that you talked about, but a major one was the need to reduce entitlement spending. Do you include that domestically, that in Australia there needs to be a reduction, and if so, in what areas?
Well, look, it was given in London. It was primarily addressed to the European audience and a British audience, because it was effectively to a group of Tory MPs. But I think we need to be vigilant, which is what I suggested. You look at the developments in Asia. You've got 2 billion emerging in the middle class there over the next 30 years. They're increasingly placing demands on their governments. Countries in Asia have certainly less as a percentage of GDP allocated to entitlements than Europe, and less than us. South Korea is about 10% of GDP allocated to entitlements. Europe's 25 to 30%. America's 20%. We're 16%. Now, we've just got to be vigilant. So you mean... And that, for example, is one of the reasons why it was wrong to convert the education tax rebate, where parents had to present receipts to the government in order to claim back money for educational expenses. The government simply turned that into an outright payment to people, whether they wanted it or not. And that was a classic example where we said it's wrong and we will not proceed with it.
So you're not necessarily talking about reducing the entitlements in other areas. And the reason I ask is because when you got to the what needs to be done component of the speech, when talking to your British audience, the sort of things you identified were things that are already happening here. Increasing the pension age, superannuation compulsory increases, things that, in fairness, the Labor government have put in.
And which we support. That's the bottom line. We're not opposing some of those initiatives. I mean, there was an initiative in relation to single parents that went through the Parliament. The Labor Party begged us for bipartisan support because they were bleeding internally on the matter, and we provided bipartisan support because it was the right thing to do in that circumstance. But let me tell you, if we were playing politics, it would have been easy to oppose it. And there have been a number of initiatives where the Labor Party has undertaken some welfare reform. The problem is they're not consistent. And then they go and have a school kids bonus, or they hand out $900 cheques. They're the things we oppose because they're flawed. Where it's reasonable, we are reasonable. Where it's unreasonable, we take a stand.
Well, let me just ask you, let's just go to the basics then. How concerned are you about the medium-term or longer-term fiscal outlook facing this country? We've had a number of quite dire warnings from private sector forecasters. People talk about many years to get the structural budget deficit eliminated. How concerned are you about the fiscal outlook and what you might have to do if you form a government?
Well, I'm obviously very concerned about the fiscal outlook. The government has no economic plan. It has no fiscal plan. It has no tax plan. And what we've said is, for example, I said it 2 years ago in a speech that was criticised by your paper, but I thought it was a right speech to give in response to a budget, where I said, we will publish the structural budget deficit every year and in my EFO, so twice a year. The government has chosen to publish a structural deficit only on an ad hoc basis, and we haven't seen it for a while.
Well,
now
how
we've
long
got others speculating.
Okay, you're going to publish that.
And that's hugely important.
How long will it take you then to eliminate what you call the structural budget deficit? How long will it take you to eliminate that?
We don't know what it is. I mean,
you must have an idea.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to speculate, but it's substantial. I mean, quite obviously it is substantial because we are still at historic high levels in terms of trade.
And you are pledged to eliminate that, are you?
Well, we have to. We have to, Paul. We have to address it. I'll tell you why, because Australia is still not funding itself as a nation. We import around $40 billion net per year.
Okay, now if we're not funding ourselves, now if we're not funding ourselves as a nation, surely this means there's got to be significant either expenditure reductions or taxation reform.
I fully accept that.
Would you work on both fronts?
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about the GST. If the state premiers agree that action's got to be taken on the GST, will you put it on the agenda for consideration?
Well, firstly, they don't. There needs to be bipartisan support.
But just say there is.
Well, no, we're getting into hypotheticals again. I have already said that the states have to carry this argument because it is the growth revenue for the states.
So if there's bipartisan support at a state level...
At a state level. And the second test I said is that they've got to carry the Australian people. Okay,
right? So they're the two tests.
If they have the unanimous agreement of the states and they carry the Australian people.
What does that mean, carry the Australian people?
Well, they have the Australian people support it. I mean, it's quite obvious.
You want them to campaign for it?
Well, they've got to campaign for it and they've got to win the Australian people over. And I'll tell you why.
But that's not going to happen. The Australian people still don't like the GST we have now, even though people like Nick Greiner make it clear we need a higher and broader GST to cover costs.
I'm sorry, Peter, it does happen. Because we won the 1998 election on that basis. No one could dispute it. It was the hardest election campaign I have ever fought.
So can you do it again?
Well, ask the state premiers. Can they do it again? Are they prepared to do it?
No, I'm asking you. Can you do it again?
Well, can we run a tax reform agenda? Of course we can. But you cannot have piecemeal approaches.
It's got to be a cop-out by the Federal Treasurer, if that's what you are, after the next election, to say the states have to carry the argument.
No, because
at the end of the day,
beneficiaries
this is crucial, isn't it, to Australia's fiscal integrity going forward?
No, I don't accept that. I don't accept it as crucial. It is part of the tax mix, but it's not crucial. The crucial part is you've got to reduce government expenditure. That's the crucial part. And you've also got to get rid of the taxes in your domain that are insidious taxes, and we said we're getting rid of the carbon tax and we're getting rid of the mining tax. But I'd just say the biggest thing Australians want from a taxation perspective at the moment is stability. That's what they want. They don't want anything coming out of left field on tax. Business constantly says to me that they are nervous about making any major commitments on expenditure because they don't know what's coming out of left field. And you look at superannuation, you look at flood levies, you look at, a tax on depreciation.
Okay, well, there's one thing we do want to look at before we finish up, and that is the white paper on energy released this week. Martin Ferguson's strategy when it comes to the electricity sector is to have deregulation of prices. He says basically the regulation here, the gold-plated regulation, has been completely counterproductive and has forced up electricity prices. What's your response to Martin Ferguson?
Well, we will, over time, give a detailed response. The white paper's been...
But what's your response as Shadow Treasurer who believes in deregulation?
I believe in deregulation as well, but can I just say, smart meters have been an abject failure in Victoria, have cost over $2 billion and have not worked in Victoria.
Do you support the broad thrust of the deregulation of the electricity sector that he wants?
I have always supported the privatisation of electricity. I don't believe the government should be involved in a market, but for a market to work, it needs to be transparent, it needs to be liquid, and it needs to have rules of engagement. And at the moment, in relation to electricity, I think it's fair to say none of those are in total in play.
All right, Paul, I know you want to keep going on this, but we are over time already. Joe Hockey, you've been generous with your time. Thanks for joining us on Australian Agenda.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Paul, as always, thank you very much for your company, and thank you for watching. We'll be back at the same time next Sunday. See you then.